A powerful attack on Crimea. The peninsula is now without air defense. A well-known colonel pressured a Russian conscript into intimacy. Footage from hidden cameras was leaked online. The Kremlin has softened its demands for ending the war. They no longer want the entire Donbas. Scandal. Hungary is closing its borders to Ukrainian military personnel due to attacks on the Druzhba oil pipeline. The Ukrainian Armed Forces have spectacularly destroyed a Russian command post. Ukraine continues to destroy oil refineries. A gasoline revolt is brewing in Russia. Hello, my name is Anastasia Dimitrovskaya. And right now, let's talk about the most important things. But first, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so we don't lose each other on YouTube. The Russian army has advanced in the north of Donetsk region near Zelenaya Dolina. Deep state analysts also report that the enemy has advanced near the settlements of Shadrigolovo, Derigov, and Novoselka, moving north of Lyman. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also stated that the Zaporizhzhia direction is currently very dangerous, as Russia is amassing its airborne forces there. Their grouping there is quite large. But the defense forces continue to hold back the enemy. And here is yet another proof of my words. For example, Ukrainian aviation is striking the main concentration point of Russian assault troops in the defense zone of the 63rd Brigade. The occupiers have been using this building in Torsky for a long time, so both our drone pilots and tank crews have repeatedly targeted it. Ukrainian defenders deserve your warm words of support in the comments. They are true heroes. Meanwhile, in Russia, drones have caused real panic. Drones reached the Oriel region, and there were booms, explosions, then more booms and more explosions. Well, honestly, it's a beautiful sight. According to local residents, there were at least 9 explosions. Local authorities only reported damage to 4 sites from debris. However, locals are saying there were direct hits. And things were also tense in occupied Crimea. The main intelligence directorate struck an expensive Russian radar from the S-400 Triumph system. According to intelligence, the attack was carried out on the night of August 28th, and as a result, yet another triumph of the occupiers on the peninsula was left blind. We could use more videos like this. Do you agree? 23 people were killed, including 4 children. At least 63 more people were injured as a result of the Russian attack on Kyiv. The fate of 8 people also remains unknown. There's also a video going viral online that is simply impossible to watch without tears. Kyiv. A dog is waiting for its owner by the ruins of the house, not knowing that he will never return. I see in the comments that we have a lot of viewers from Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Georgia, the USA, and Europe. We are very grateful to you for your support. Write to us from which country you are watching and whether you believe that good will triumph over evil in this war. I will be happy to read your comments this evening and like the ones I enjoy the most. In the meantime, we continue. Now comes the most interesting part. Russia has softened its territorial demands on Ukraine in negotiations about a possible peace. This was stated by the Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan. Fidan says that initially Moscow insisted on full control over the Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhzhia regions. However, now, according to a preliminary agreement, the Kremlin is willing to settle along the current front line, except for part of the Donetsk region. The minister clarified that this concerns transferring to Russia the remaining 25 to 30% of the Donetsk region currently controlled by Ukraine, as well as allowing Russia to retain its current positions in the Kherson and Zaporizhzhia regions. Russia will help Kim Jong Un search for uranium for atomic bombs. That certainly sounds terrifying, but what this will actually mean in practice will be explained by our journalists. Let's watch.
Russia will help Kim Jong Un search for uranium for atomic bombs. A program to improve the qualifications of geologists from North Korea will be launched in Irkutsk.
Most importantly, our profound gratitude goes to the highly respected governor of the Irkutsk region, Comrade Pozdev, for, despite his incredibly busy schedule, and I want to emphatically repeat, despite his exceptionally busy schedule, paying a great deal of dedicated attention to the successful creation of this important society and actively taking part in the significant opening ceremony.
As for the possibility of training DPRK personnel, they have already been receiving training on the territory of the Russian Federation. In fact, the Russian Federation stands behind the so-called DPRK nuclear program.
For the newly trained personnel in the DPRK, production capacities are also being expanded. Such decisions have raised concerns at the IAEA.
A new uranium enrichment plant has been completed. They plan to increase plutonium production for a larger number of nuclear weapons. We are also seeing newly constructed facilities, in addition to those we have traditionally monitored.
There is no capability to mine uranium on the territory of the DPRK. Accordingly, the Russian Federation is making it clear that uranium, whether enriched or not, will be supplied to the DPRK from Russian territory.
In neighboring South Korea, people are already panicking since they don't have their own nuclear weapons, and their unpredictable neighbor is becoming increasingly dangerous.
North Korea continues to develop its missile and nuclear program, and now the DPRK is close to completing this program. They are in the final stages of developing intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of striking targets at great distances, and they are accumulating between 10 and 20 nuclear weapons per year. Over the past 4 to 5 years, the number of such weapons has increased 2.5 times. Their capabilities for producing materials have also increased significantly.
The Russian Federation is making it clear that its political statements about suspending participation in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty are being followed by practical actions. Moreover, this concerns the expansion specifically of the nuclear component of the DPRK's nuclear arsenal, and accordingly Iran's as well.
US President Trump is concerned about the expansion of North Korea's nuclear program, as he, on the contrary, wants to reduce the nuclear capabilities of all countries. That is why he plans to meet with the North Korean dictator. Understanding this, Russia is deliberately putting pressure on the US by creating new programs with North Korea.
I have a very good relationship with Kim Jong Un and with North Korea, and many will say that this is terrible. But no, everything is fine. In fact, someday I will see him. I am looking forward to meeting him. He has been very kind to me. We had 2 meetings, we got along great, and I know him better than you do. I shouldn't say that I like him, because if I do, I'll get killed in the fake news.
That is, the Russian Federation has in fact moved to nuclear blackmail of the United States. Moreover, once again, this information has emerged on the eve of large-scale military exercises by the United States Army in South Korea. With this statement, the Russian Federation is in fact attempting to destabilize the situation on the Korean peninsula and exert elements of military political pressure on the United States.
At this point, North Korea is practically Russia's main partner, providing weapons, military personnel, and labor for the war against Ukraine.
At our specific request, the Korean side is currently providing a significant contingent of 1,000 sappers who will be actively engaged in the crucial task of demining the Kursk region, a vital area. And the second part is a division of construction workers. These are 2 brigades, 5,000 people combined into a single division of military builders who will be involved in the reconstruction of the Kursk region. This is a kind of fraternal assistance from the Korean people and their leader, Kim Jong Un.
In response, Russia gives North Korea money, resources, and technology, increasingly trying to deepen the ties between the 2 regimes.
We have always supported and continue to support all the decisions of President Putin and the Russian government. I hope that we will always stand together in the fight against imperialism.
I was glad to personally thank the commanders of the Korean People's Army and convey my warmest regards to the soldiers and commanders of the Special Forces units of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
It's quite enough to simply state that just 2 short days ago, after a considerably long and much-needed break, the very first Pyongyang-Moscow train successfully departed. I sincerely hope that very soon the first passenger airplane will also depart, especially since there haven't been any direct flights for more than 30 long and arduous years. That is all.
Forming an alliance with a country that is up to its ears in sanctions, just like Russia itself, is not the best solution for its economy or for the well-being of its citizens.
Attacks on Russian oil refineries will accelerate inflation and worsen the economic situation in the Russian Federation. Analysts from the Institute for the Study of War note that Russian military correspondents are already howling about the problem, pointing out the terrible performance of air defense and the consequences of the strike in the form of rising gasoline prices, which citizens have already started to feel. Meanwhile, strikes on targets deep in the rear remain one of the most painful issues for Russia, simultaneously undermining trust in the authorities' ability to protect critically important infrastructure.
The Russian information space has been blaming the Russian leadership for its inability to protect Russian military infrastructure from strikes by Ukrainian drones throughout the entire period of Russia's full-scale invasion. Long-range Ukrainian drone strikes continue to put pressure on this existing nerve center in the Russian information space.
Do you think this outrage will escalate into something the Kremlin won't be able to handle? The Russian port of Ust-Luga will operate at half capacity in September due to pipeline damage caused by a Ukrainian drone attack. Reuters, citing sources, reports that the Russian oil export terminal in Ust-Luga will operate at a capacity of about 350,000 barrels per day in September, which is roughly half of its usual capacity, following damage to pipeline infrastructure as a result of Ukrainian drone attacks. Journalists note that the disruptions demonstrate how recent Ukrainian strikes on key energy facilities are complicating Russian exports and could lead to supply interruptions.
According to sources, the reduced throughput at Ust-Luga will result in oil volumes being redirected to the Russian ports of Primorsk and Novorossiysk. This could help limit export losses.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
And yes, Russian authorities have not publicly commented on the extent of the damage or its impact on export schedules. In short, it seems that the special military operation is still going according to plan. Russian businesses are begging Putin to compensate for the funds lost as a result of successful Ukrainian Armed Forces attacks. First and foremost, this concerns enterprises in the oil refining sector. What was Putin's response? Let's keep watching.
It's no longer possible to keep silent about this. Russian businesses are asking Putin to protect them from Ukrainian drones. The Union of Industrialists has already registered dozens of appeals from Russia's largest enterprises with a single message. Because of the war with Ukraine, we are losing millions of dollars every day.
The scale of destruction, specific objectives.
Officials simply can no longer ignore the situation. Therefore, it was decided to send a collective appeal to Putin, proposing to amend the tax legislation to include compensation for losses caused by drone attacks. At the same time, several solutions to the problem were proposed right away.
The first is a tax compensation amounting to 50% of the actual expenses for the construction or purchase of protective structures, as well as the acquisition and installation of video surveillance systems, detection, electronic warfare, repair and restoration of production facilities, compensation for damage to third parties, and more.
At the same time, the letter emphasizes that enterprises incur losses not only due to direct damage, but also because of lost income resulting from work stoppages. Therefore, the next proposal from Russia's top entrepreneurs is to deduct this amount from the taxes and excise duties they pay to the state budget, and in the case of prolonged downtime, to reduce these payments to zero altogether.
Here we go again.
But the catch here is that Putin simply no longer has the money to provide this kind of support to his own strategic enterprises. Everything is going to the war. As a result, on the night of August 28th, Russia's Samara region and Krasnodar Krai came under yet another drone attack. The strikes targeted the largest oil refineries, Afipsky and Kuibishevsky, which, by the way, had no proper protection against drones.
Every day now, another refinery is being set on fire by drones. And here we are, sitting and wondering, should we defend ourselves or not? That's how it is. The Russians, who don't just take a long time to get going, they take way too long.
Meanwhile, on paper, everything is perfectly in order in the Russian leadership, as always. They understand the threat posed by enemy drones. Endless commissions are at work, measures are being taken.
Most of those who have been hit either had nothing at all in place or were given those so-called anti-drone rifles, which at best can protect you from a Mavic, yes, but nothing more. So basically it's a police-type system. And what are you supposed to do against a gasoline-powered drone, right? like say a Boba drone or something carrying, 15 to 20 kilos of explosives, right? It flies essentially without utilizing any of those sophisticated communication systems that the rifles are specifically designed and intended to effectively counter.
The result of such effective solutions was not long in coming. On the morning of August 28th, after assessing the results of the night attack, the Ukrainian command concluded that, in total, over the past 2 weeks, they had reduced Russian oil refining capacity by more than 20%. This matches the calculations by Reuters, who specifically noted the strikes on Ryazan Rosneft, the Novoshakhtinsk refinery that has been burning for a week, as well as plants in the Rostov, Samara, Saratov, and Krasnodar regions, and of course the crucial Volgograd Lukoil facility.
This was the second plant in terms of profit generation, in terms of revenue in Russia. It is among the 6 largest refineries in the country, and the consequences there could be quite serious.
In total, to put it in numbers, the losses to the Russian budget as of today amount to about 1,300,000 barrels of oil per day. Given the current market price, that's approximately $87.5 million in significant financial losses occurring every single day, without fail. It's ironic, but despite the reluctance to help strategic enterprises defend themselves against drones, an almost separate business has already sprung up in Russia based on this very danger. For example, organizers of any mass event are now required to ensure its safety, which means they have to turn to government agencies to provide protection against drones.
Let's say we're holding some large-scale public event just once, for example, Scarlet Sales. For instance, Scarlet Sales or some major economic forum or something else of that sort. Obviously, this is a one-time event and it might only require security systems for a few days to hold a forum, event, festival, and so on. Yes.
At the same time, we can't really talk about permanent protection for enterprises. The officials' proposals to change the tax system were rejected, and the responsibility for defending against drones was placed on the heads of the companies and their personal savings. After that, it seems Ukraine breathed a sigh of relief. After all, not every enterprise can afford multi-million-dollar security measures.
There are facilities that can be targeted. These aren't necessarily energy infrastructure sites like oil refineries or oil storage facilities. They also include logistics infrastructure, factories, military sites, airfields, and bases for various types of equipment. That's all of them. There would be enough drones for all of these.
It keeps flying.
No, absolutely not.
Hungary just won't calm down. After the strike on the Druzhba oil pipeline, pro-Russian politicians in Hungary have essentially made a new attempt to shift the blame for the war onto Ukraine. In addition, Hungary is resorting to provocations. Hungary has banned entry to a prominent Ukrainian officer with the call sign Magyar, commander of Ukraine's unmanned aerial systems forces, attention, who is an ethnic Hungarian. This Ukrainian citizen will not be allowed to enter Hungary and the Schengen area in the coming years. Hungarian Foreign Minister Peter Szijjártó also stated that the attack on the Druzhba oil pipeline is an attack on Hungary's sovereignty. After the order regarding Magyar, even Zelensky did not remain silent.
However, every day new accusations against Ukraine are heard from Hungary. Hungarian officials have come to the point where they are trying to discriminate against members of the Hungarian community in Ukraine for their participation in defending our state and people.
Zelensky instructed the Ukrainian Ministry of Foreign Affairs to clarify facts and respond accordingly. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs then summoned the Hungarian ambassador and handed him a protest note over the Magyar issue. This was written by the head of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Andrei Sibiha.
We urge Hungary to continue refraining from unfriendly actions and instead to engage in constructive dialogue, which Ukraine remains ready for.
But what kind of dialogue can there be if they're on the phone with the Kremlin? The scandal was also commented on by Magyar himself.
Shove your sanctions and travel restrictions to Hungary, where the sun doesn't shine, Mr. Dancer on Graves. I am Ukrainian, and I will come to my father's homeland after you are gone. There are enough real Magyars in Hungary, and one day you will...
It's obvious that these actions by Hungary are a reaction to the strike on the Druzhba platform. And to some extent, this is understandable because as a result, they have faced a lot of problems. But to quote the same Ukrainian foreign minister, address your complaints to your friends in Moscow. That's so... The European Commission is developing a mechanism that will allow nearly 200 billion euros of frozen Russian assets to be transferred for Ukraine's post-war reconstruction. According to Politico, this issue will be discussed during an informal meeting of EU foreign ministers, which will take place today in Copenhagen. Journalists also report, citing a preparatory note at their disposal, that during the discussion the ministers will consider further options for using the income generated from frozen Russian assets.
Supporters also view this scheme as a step toward the possible seizure of assets and their transfer to Ukraine as punishment for Russia's refusal to pay post-war compensation. It is important to note that this option does not provide for the immediate confiscation of assets, which most EU countries oppose due to financial and legal concerns.
In particular, Belgian Prime Minister Bart De Wever has opposed the confiscation of assets, stating that it is a complicated legal process. What do you think? Will there finally be movement on the issue of transferring frozen Russian assets to Ukraine? The European Union is considering for the first time the possibility of using a secondary sanctions mechanism against third countries that help Moscow circumvent existing restrictions. Bloomberg reports this, citing sources familiar with the discussions. All the details are coming up in the report.
For the first time, the European Union may use the mechanism of secondary sanctions against third countries that help Moscow circumvent existing restrictions.
In other words, it is not the direct perpetrator who is punished, but rather those countries or companies that facilitate the circumvention of these international sanctions. These entities, by enabling the bypass of regulations, become the primary targets of enforcement.
According to Bloomberg, the foreign ministers of EU countries will gather in Copenhagen as early as the end of this week. They are expected to discuss the use of the so-called anti-circumvention instrument adopted in 2023, but which has not yet been implemented.
When you impose sanctions, you absolutely need a large number of people to monitor their enforcement. That's why there is a lot of criticism of Trump's policies when he cuts funding for those very US government agencies that are supposed to oversee compliance with sanctions. When this kind of oversight is lacking, their effectiveness is far from ideal.
The restriction mechanism makes it possible to ban the export, supply, or transfer of certain goods to countries that, according to Brussels, are helping Russia circumvent the sanctions regime.
The discussions among EU leaders will essentially revolve around the main debate, whether to fully commit to Trump's trajectory and follow in his wake, or whether it's necessary to make it clear that the EU is an independent group. Here, the question of the EU's agency is at stake. However, the irony is that while, in general, Ukraine benefits from the EU's agency, in this particular case, that agency is not advantageous for us. What would actually benefit us is for the US and the EU to act as a single entity, putting pressure on everyone who is helping Russia.
In addition, the ministers intend to discuss the possibility of expanding restrictions against the Russian oil and gas and financial sectors, as well as additional measures regarding the import and export of Russian goods. However, the meeting will not address discussions of the next 19th package of sanctions against Russia.
First of all, they will discuss the mechanisms for this control and ways to strengthen that control. Secondly, they will discuss what Besson is talking about, taking certain steps together with the United States. In other words, this is not exactly a new package of sanctions. I agree. This is more of a response to the policy of the United States of America, specifically a psychological decision by the EU to say, we agree with you to put joint pressure on Russia by raising tariffs on countries like China and India.
Despite the sanctions and Russia's budget deficit, Putin continues to fund the war. As a result, by the end of the first half of 2025, Russia's military spending reached almost 8.5 trillion rubles.
They are producing weapons, they are making ammunition, but there is no added value for the economy. In other words, they are diverting resources, and that's it. So we've covered the first factor. Now, why are resources becoming even scarcer? The second significant factor contributing to the current situation is the persistently unfavorable price situation for both oil and natural gas. Indeed, global oil prices have experienced a notable drop of approximately 15% from their previous levels and have subsequently stabilized at a range of around $66 to $67 per barrel, reflecting a new market equilibrium. That's for Brent crude. And for Russian oil, it's around $62 per barrel, a price point that has been established. But that's not all. There's also the significant effect of economic sanctions.
On average, the Russian military machine was consuming 1.4 trillion rubles per month and almost 47 billion rubles per day. This amount exceeds the annual budgets of Russia's poorer regions.
Traditional Russian spending on science, culture, education, and healthcare is currently being significantly cut, and pension indexation is frozen because inflation is understated in the official statistics. It's actually approximately 15%. But there is no such indexation of pensions. And this significant development means that many pensioners will continue to see their pensions noticeably reduced, while the substantial spending on the ongoing war effort dramatically increases.
Not only is Putin sending Russians to die, but the Kremlin dictator is spending every other ruble from Russians' taxes on the army, leaving his country destitute and impoverished.
Europe is discussing the creation of a 40-kilometer buffer zone in Ukraine. Politico reports that the plan includes deploying peacekeeping forces to monitor the ceasefire. However, the initiative is receiving mixed reviews. It may require territorial concessions from Kyiv and currently does not have its official support.
Nevertheless, the very fact that officials are trying to cordon off a strip of land on Ukrainian territory to achieve a fragile peace shows the desperate desire of NATO allies to end a war that has been going on for almost 4 years.
And what do you think? Would it be fair to call such intentions of European leaders an act of desperation? How effective could this so-called buffer zone actually be? No one is writing to the colonel because the colonel got caught up in a high-profile sex scandal. Specifically, the well-known colonel of the Belarusian army, Pavel Matkuchev, forced a Russian serviceman, so to speak, into intimate drills. By the way, this happened during preparations for the Zapad 2025 military exercises. And in fact, a video was leaked online showing the same colonel giving instructions to the Russian servicemen. We can't show you all of that, but that's probably for the best. However, we can definitely show you the correspondence between this colonel and the Russian soldier.
The main thing is that it holds up, doesn't break.
Well, I know how to get ready.
We'll meet on Sunday. I'll be free. You pick the place.
Yeah, I live alone. That's the upside of living alone.
All right, we'll be in touch then. I'm going to delete this chat now, so message me on Saturday.
The colonel himself is known on social media as Pavel Mirny. He also had an exemplary reputation as an officer and a family man, and even received an award from Lukashenko for impeccable service. What do you think of our news? Do you like it or not so much? Let us know what we should change to get better, and we'll definitely take it into account. In the meantime, give this video a like to support what we're doing. Be sure to subscribe to our channel Ukraine Today so you don't miss our next episodes. See you soon!